poet Friedrich Schiller, Germany wasn't a country. It was a question mark. Germany, he asked? Where is it? Where? I don't know where to find it. The truth is that for most of its history, Germany was not a unified state, but an assemblage of disparate parts. Not a nation, so much as a process. For centuries, Germany was a construct of the mind, the creation of writers, painters, visionaries. That's why art has always been at its core.
Reflecting its diverse origins, German culture is itself a unique blend of passion and precision, exact craftsmanship and the impulsive gesture, a love of nature and a love of the machine, a need for escape and a desire for control. And I believe that one of the most revealing ways to explore the complexities of the German character is through the story of German art.
It's a tale of fascinating extremes. From the ghouls and demons of the German Middle Ages to some of the most beautiful sculptures ever created. From the radiant landscapes of Caspar David Friedrich to the thrusting symbols of Prussian power and the abyss of the Third Reich, where art was twisted into a tool for terror. It's an often dark story, but ultimately one of hope, humanity, and renewal. Ventured into the heart of Europe in the 1st century BC. The territory they encountered was cold, damp, mysterious. It was a world away from the sunshine and open vistas of ancient Italy.
It was the Roman historian Tacitus who first gave this place and its inhabitants a name. They were the Germanic tribes, and this was Germania, a place Tacitus wrote that positively bristled with forests, and he believed that the people who lived here had been fundamentally shaped by their own primeval environment. The truth is that for 2,000 years the German creative imagination has drawn strength from the idea and the memory of the forest. It's been the central image for so many poets, writers, and above all, artists.
The poet Johann Wolfgang von Goethe believed that there was a single work of art that expressed this more vividly than any other. An art form with its roots firmly planted in the primeval forest. It's the German Gothic cathedral. Goethe likened it to a sublimely towering tree of God, with its 1,000 branches and millions of twigs. This is the Cathedral of St. Peter. It was once the tallest building in the world, and for nearly 700 years it's loomed over the city of Cologne. Inside, distilled to its essence, you'll find all the intoxicating variety of German art. In fact, this is a microcosm of art in the early German lands, with work in every medium, expressing many different moods. There's the refined and austere. This bronze sculpture of the cathedral's founder, Conrad von Hochstatten, eyes fixed on heaven. Well, this richly gilded altarpiece of the Cologne school of painting commemorates the city's patron saints, in a burst of textile and gold. But there's also the dark and the mysterious. For me, the most compelling work in the cathedrals, this painfully expressive wooden sculpture of Christ, dating right back to the 10th century. What's fascinating about the art in here is how it pulls in opposing directions. It shows just how schizophrenic and contradictory German art can be. Look up towards the vault and you'll find these sinuous, elegantly expressive stone statues staring down at you. But look down into the choir and you'll find a very different, more raucous world, inhabited by these folk figures and grotesques. Goethe wasn't just myth-making when he likened the Gothic cathedral to a forest. These faces and figures really do look as if they're peering out from some forest undergrowth. In fact, this whole place feels like it hasn't been built. It's just grown. As the Middle Ages passed into the Renaissance, what we now call Germany simply didn't exist. Instead, there were the German lands, a vast patchwork of separate cities, states and fiefdoms, all just a part of the sprawling Holy Roman Empire. Although each territory had its own identity and system of rule, they were all subject to a succession of distant emperors, based in Spain and later Austria. Despite their lack of true independence, in times of peace, centres like Cologne could compete with any of the great cities of Europe.
Cologne was part of the so-called Hanseatic League, a confederation of around 100 independent cities whose lifeblood was commerce. They pooled their resources and became one of the great trading powers of medieval and Renaissance Europe, with warehouses in Venice, London, even as far afield as Novgorod in Russia.
So while German culture could be inward-looking, feudal, provincial, it also received an ever-changing quicksilver influx of ideas from beyond its borders. Many far-flung influences to be absorbed and transformed. It's a pattern exactly reflected in the qualities of German art. If you want to see this process in action, the best place to come is the Alte Pinakothek Gallery in Munich.
So what were artists getting up to in the German lands during the second half of the 15th century? Well, part of the answer, at least, is to be found in this room, which gives us a rather wonderful panorama of northern and central German painting at the time. And what you notice, first of all, I think, is the influence of Flanders, of the Northern Renaissance. They've clearly been looking at the work of artists such as Roger van der Weyden or the Van Eyck brothers. You can see it everywhere in their use of oil paint, these vivid colours, these crisply painted draperies, and these rather reserved porcelain faces. But this is still very much a painter working within the intellectual context of the late Gothic world. He doesn't paint a blue sky, he paints a gold ground sky. This is the vault of heaven, not a naturalistic depiction of the earth. That begins to creep in here, rather more sophisticated work of art by the master of the Bartholomew altar. Look at that wonderful, almost monochrome, bluey grey landscape peeping up above this brocade curtain. But best of all here is look at this vomiting, scowling demon with his staring yellow eyes. Isn't he wonderful? No one does ghouls better than the Germans. And you get a great example of that over here, where again, we don't know the name of the painter. He's simply known as the master of the legend of St. Anthony. It's a wonderfully vivid image. Comic strip account of the legends of St. Anthony. Hundreds of different incidents from his life. But at the centre, the eye is just drawn to it. This extraordinary image of the saint being set about by 5 of these fiendishly vivid demons. I think the most striking thing about this German Renaissance painting is the way in which the artist makes devils, demons, seem more real, more flesh and blood than ordinary human beings.
Although German painters were aware of the grace and refinement of Renaissance art, they clung to the superstitions of the Middle Ages. So why did ghouls and demons so haunt the German imagination? The truth is, for many Germans, it really was as if hell was just around the corner. Most people led feudal lives, dominated by trauma and hardship.
It's been estimated that the total population of the Holy Roman Empire was by 1340 around 15 million people. Now, the vast majority of those people lived on the land, in rural villages or on farms. But over the next 100 years, their lives were to be dominated by a succession of catastrophes. The Black Death, bubonic plague, was followed by famine. Their feudal overlords turned mercenary robber barons, taking by force whatever they wanted. Around a third of the entire population, that's 5 million people, were wiped out. No wonder that to many, life itself seemed little more than a form of barely organised anarchy.
In this world, the first priority of the artist was not to create beauty. It was to console and to comfort. Here in the Alsatian town of Colmar, there's one of the most fascinating relics of this world. Made for the prayers of patients at a hospital for plague and skin diseases, people covered in boils and weeping sores. It's the Eisenheim altarpiece, and it was completed in 1515 by Matthias Grunewald.
This is probably the most grotesque depiction of the crucifixion in all of art. It's enormous and just astonishingly arresting. It is a dermatological vision of the crucifixion, and I think you have to imagine the people who would have prayed before this image. This is Grunewald's way of saying, well, Christ suffered like you, but don't give up hope. Pray to the image, and you may be cured. Now, you might look at this and think that Grunewald was an artist almost compelled by his own late Gothic style, that he didn't make stylistic choices. But if you look at the right and the left panels, he's showing us that, yes, I'm perfectly well aware of Renaissance style. Look at St. Sebastian, almost like a marbled Italian statue. Look at St. Anthony, depicted with this rather solemn realism. But then look just above St. Anthony, and there's this demon bursting through the window. And I think, if you like, that demon bursting through the window is Grunewald's style.
The Eisenheim altarpiece was originally a huge hinged structure, only opened at special times such as Lent. But now it's been dismantled, so its inner world of imagery is permanently visible. And the second layer of paintings is brighter, more optimistic than the first.
Now, these are very different images. They speak of hope and redemption. Up here you've got this visionary image of Christ rising up out of the grave, still in his winding sheet. Can you imagine a more radiant and transfigured body than that? Because what's the first thing you notice about his body? The whiteness of the skin, the purity. It's as if he's been made whole, he's been cured. Think of that livid green flesh of the other image. It's almost got that before and after quality of an advert for some miraculous skin cream. Except what it's really advertising is the power of prayer.
In the final set of images, Grunewald returns to the dark side. He shows St. Jerome in a Germanic wilderness. Here he's beset by demons and devils. A building smoulders in the background, and a disfigured peasant lies suffering next to the saint. The whole scene radiates fear and anxiety.
What's Grunewald really representing here? It's almost like it's a picture of the psyche of a deeply troubled time. Yes, we can dream of salvation, we can dream of being made whole, but the reality is that sickness will strike, armies will loot and pillage, and if that doesn't happen, those forces that haunted the forest of ancient times, they're still there and they're liable to come out and get you.
Art historians still disagree about what label to attach to this cryptic, slippery masterpiece. Some say it's Renaissance, others that it's Gothic. The truth is that Grunewald almost embraced the Renaissance. but in the end he recognised that he was still painting for people rooted in the old world of medieval piety. That same tension runs through the work of the most famous German artist of the period. This is a self-portrait by Grunewald's contemporary, Albrecht Dürer. He completed it in 1498, a few years after his first trip to Italy. He's painted himself in the Italian style, almost as a male version of Leonardo's enigmatic Mona Lisa. But the landscape in the background shows the Alps, and by implication, the tug of his homeland. He painted this self-portrait just 2 years later. This is very much Dürer the German, solemn, sober. What's most striking is the face, with its wide, sad eyes. He's made himself look like Jesus Christ. But why?
I think the key to this picture is in the date that's written just above Dürer's monogram. It says 1500, a very significant date, because 1500 was the year that many believed, reading the book of Revelations with its reference to the half-time after the time, many believed that this was the moment when the end of the world would begin. This was the moment when the final conflict would almost be upon us. And I think what Dürer is saying in this self-portrait is that we should all of us imitate the example of Christ, follow Christ more than ever before. So yes, Dürer is a man of the Renaissance, but I think he's even more a medieval man.
Dürer was suspended between worlds, the old and the new. And the most powerful example of that is his work in a revolutionary, recently invented medium, the reproductive print. Dürer was a prolific printmaker, using both copper and wooden plates. At the Graphische Sammlung in Munich, they've got a fine collection of his woodcuts. And what's striking is how Dürer's used the new medium of the print to plunge you back in time, back to a dark, Gothic way of seeing and feeling.
Here we've got Dürer's Large Passion, which exemplifies his belief that if apocalypse really is round the corner, we should all focus our attention on the life of Christ. And it's effectively a portable version of a fresco cycle that you can put in a box, carry around and look at whenever you feel the need. I think what's remarkable about Dürer is that in a sense, it's something he's got in common with Shakespeare, that he's so seethingly responsive to human existence and to humanity that he doesn't just actually focus on Christ, he gives us the whole world. It's as if Dürer just cannot bear a single inch of the image to be devoid of incident. On the theme of Germans doing the best devils, look at these wonderful devils in the harrowing of hell. I mean, it's full of sadness in the eyes, actually. There's a kind of pathos that you almost feel that Dürer feels sorry for these weird monsters whose job it is to guard hell forever. But for me, it's really this image, the entombment
It really stays in my mind. And I think for good reason, because so much of the German art tradition is about expressing human emotion, cramming images full of feeling. Look at the trees and their roots, these agonized forms. It's as if nature itself is screaming out at the moment of Christ's death. And when you think of the language that Dürer invented here, you know, this flattened, almost spaceless collage of strong emotion, a wall of feeling. There's so much here for the future of German and indeed Northern European art. It's the death of Christ, but it's the birth of a kind of expressionistic language for art. Dürer's woodcuts took me back to Goethe's cult of the German forest. They even look like images carved from root and branch, or glimpsed through forest undergrowth. And those same forms and shapes permeated the art of Germany in all its rich variety. Dürer has become so synonymous with German Renaissance art that it's easy to forget that he was actually the exception to the rule. Deeply learned, widely travelled. If you want to know what kind of art most Germans knew, looked at, looked to and were moved by, you have to look to a very different but equally fascinating tradition. It's one that takes you to the very roots of German art. A very particular form of sculpture, and some of its finest examples are in the most out-of-the-way places. This is the village of Großlangheim in the Bavarian countryside. The artists of every region develop their own specialisations, their own peculiar approaches to style and subject matter, but I sometimes think that we pay insufficient attention to the extent to which artistic style is shaped by material. For example, imagine Florence and the art of Tuscany without fresco painting. Imagine Venice, too cold and humid for fresco, without oil painting. Well, here in Bavaria, in southern Germany, a whole tradition, an extraordinary tradition of sculpture grew from this material, the wood of the limewood tree. It was an art form that grew directly out of the intense piety of old feudal Germany. And you still have to seek it out, not in grand museums, but in little churches and chapels. I'd heard there were some particularly fine sculptures here, in the Antonius Kapelle.
Das ist Schlüssel, ja? Danke, ich lerne Deutsch.
Hardly anyone comes to see them, so the caretaker had to unlock the chapel for me.
Wie heißen Sie?
Frau Stark.
Frau Stark. Ich heiße Andrew.
The works here were by the greatest German limewood sculptor of them all, Tilman Riemenschneider.
Wow. Sie sind schön?
Die sind schön, ja.
Ja,
Beste.
Beste.
Ja.
I think so too. They're so beautiful. Sehr, sehr schön.
But to see just how fine the carving was, I needed to grow by a couple of feet.
How very kind of you. Danke schön. No, they really are fantastic. I mean, seeing them almost face to face like this, you can see Riemenschneider's true genius is for capturing fine detail of form and expression. This figure of St. Anthony, look at him, emaciated, solemn, his eyes lost in contemplation. This is very much St. Anthony, the desert saint. And I love that detail of the belt What a fine piece of carving that is, to get that belt clasp stuck at that angle. And that hair is absolutely fantastic, the hair of Antony's beard. The hand holding the book. Little bits of thought on the part of the sculptor that make the difference between something you really believe and something that you think is sort of somehow too theatrical. Just think that here we are in this little chapel off a main road in a pretty nondescript village in Bavaria, and we're looking at some of the great masterpieces.
The two saints are just fragments of what was once a larger, now lost altarpiece. To experience the full effect of a complete Riemenschneider, its whole crowd of characters intact, the best place to go is Rottenburg ob der Tauber and its Jakobskirche. This is the Holy Blood altar with its dense cluster of figures carved from wood.
This is Tilman Riemenschneider's narrative masterpiece. It's absolutely stunning, stunning piece of work. It's like a great tree planted in the middle of the cathedral, and at the centre you've got the great drama of the Last Supper. There's Jesus Christ breaking the bread, blessing the bread and the wine, and saying at the same time, "One of you here will betray me." And look at all those apostles on the right, reacting. Who's it going to be? Who's going to betray him? What's he talking about? It was designed for the performance of a very specific religious ritual. And the key to that is its most unusual feature, Judas, who's right in the middle of the scene. Now, why should Judas be right in the middle of the scene? Normally, he's on the edge. In order to explain it, we've got to do a double take and come back in again, but this time imagining that we're in early 16th century German. Okay, so I metaphorically take off my art historian hat and I put on my medieval cap of a penitent, because this was a confession altar. You would be sent here to confess because you'd done something bad. And as I walk in on the line of Judas. That is why Judas is there. It's to make Judas into an alter ego for me, the person coming to confess. And as you're drawn in, you become part of the sculpture. You become the figure of Judas. And the question is whether you're going to do the right thing. And you've got a bit of help, because there's one figure and he's looking straight into my eyes. And that's St. Philip. And he's giving me the choice. He's saying, what do you want to do? His hand, that right hand, is pointing down here to the altar. You can be like Judas, or you can choose the bread and wine. You can choose Christian faith. You can choose redemption. It's an extraordinary piece of sculpture. I mean, you're not just being drawn into the theatre, you're actually being co-opted. You've been given a role to play. In fact, you've been given a choice of roles. Are you going to be Judas? Or are you going to be one of the saved? Are you going to be damned? Or are you going to be blessed? It's up to you. I'm very struck when looking at Tilman Riemenschneider's work. There's this sense that he's finding forms that are
that almost exist already within the potential of wood to create. So it's not as if he's imposing his own aesthetic on the wood, he's finding it with the wood. It's as if he's working with the material. I arranged to meet Bernard Lankers, the closest thing you'll find to a sculptor now working within the German limewood tradition. There's no call for full-scale altarpieces anymore, but the old woodcarver's skills are still required in the specialised field of frame making.
Are you almost trying to find organic form inside the wood?
Yes, it's very important, and very often, if I carve, I'm not sure which is the right drive in it, and then I make a test with my hand, and when I feel good or I feel this line, okay, then I can do it. Not only make a leaf, what is going round, you must feel the line, and then if you feel the line, then you can carve this idea.
Can you actually show me the qualities that you're talking about with limewood? Can you explain with your tools what it's like to cut limewood? Why you like it?
Yes, okay, I try it.
So no messing about at the beginning. What is it, the shape that you have in your mind? What is it that you're making? Or is it a secret?
Oh, no. In my mind, I have the idea from the form. It's only a big flower.
I was very struck by Bernard's eloquent hands. The sheer physicality of his demonstration of working with the energies of the wood. It made me all the keener to complete my Riemenschneider pilgrimage. There was a particular work I really wanted to see, said to have been carved from a single enormous piece of limewood and completed in the year 1521. It's to be found in the church of Maria in Weingarten, above the village of Volkach, again very much off the beaten track. It belonged to a 16th century society of beguines, as they were called, wealthy women who devoted themselves to helping the sick and the poor. Coming here, you really feel what feudal life was like in tiny rural communities, where the good works of a few good women could be the only form of social security. The sculpture the Beguines commissioned from Riemenschneider was a delicate circle of wood, encompassing all their deepest values.
It's such a brilliant invention, because the subject is a vision. The vision of St. John, taken from the book of Revelations. I saw a woman clothed with the sun, beneath her feet the moon, and on her head a crown. The crown's gone, lost to time, but you can still sense its presence in the gestures of those two angels. And it's in the form of a rosary. And I think you have to actually kneel down and imagine that the whole church is full of women like you kneeling, and you are looking up at this image of the Virgin Mary. And you pray together. Each of those roundels on the outside of the necklace represents a different episode from the life of Mary. Now, on each of those images, you would meditate so that this object was
an invitation to prayer. And looking at it from here, that V of drapery in the middle of the figure, it's clearly intended by Riemenschneider to place immense emphasis on the fruitful womb. And then if you look up at that delightful little figure of Christ, his flesh has got that slightly wrinkly feel of a newborn. And you can imagine all these women who've decided never to give birth, to give themselves to Christ. You can imagine that effect that must have on them. It's such a subtle, clever object as well, because there would come a point when the sun rose high up enough in the sky that that whole image would burn out and it would become like the vision that St. John had experienced. There might be a kind of ecstasy that would take place. Riemenschneider, essentially, he's working with wood, but he's also working with light. He's like a Renaissance installation artist, if you like, creating these images, these effects that are almost designed to plunge you into a state of hallucination. It's a really remarkable thing. Despite the rosary's aura of peace and serenity, this was a world in the throes of a great religious change. All across the German lands there was growing unhappiness with Catholic Rome, with its doctrines and its demands for money. Germans felt they were being duped by papal agents hawking the promise of eternal life, an insult to their faith. In 1517, a monk called Martin Luther nailed a list of theological objections to the door of his local church. It sparked the Reformation and a new breakaway religion, Protestantism. These satirical prints show the depth of the German Protestants' disgust. They look like the grinning medieval ghouls of old, but what a world of difference. These are images of the Catholic clergy. Even the Pope himself. This is the town of Wittenberg, where Luther first made his protestations. But he preached politics too, and his Reformation was the first serious attempt to bind the German lands into a single nation. In the city church there's a work of art by Luther's friend, Lucas Cranach, a kind of painted manifesto for the whole Protestant project. Here in Wittenberg they call this the Reformation altarpiece, and I think that's apt because it is a wonderfully clear statement of the new priorities of the Church after the Lutheran Reformation. I don't think it's a masterpiece. I find it a slightly cold, distant, calculated picture, but I also think that's the point. It tells you how to be a good Lutheran. It spells out the principles. Number one, reduce the rituals of the Church. Under Luther, the sacraments were literally reduced from 7 to 2. Just baptism, represented in the left-hand panel, and the Eucharist, represented by that Last Supper in the middle. This is an altarpiece that aspires to the condition of an instruction manual, and there at the bottom, I think it's the image that says it all. There is Martin Luther, instructing his congregation. It's through the Word, through meditating on the Bible, that Christ will appear in everyone's lives. I think this picture is an extremely eloquent expression of Luther's great attempt to purge German religion and German art of the ghouls, demons and superstitions of the past. And what he wants to put in their place is faith and reason.
Luther also saw the Reformation as a means of nation building, a way to unite the disparate German peoples under the banner of faith. And there's a second work in the church by Cranach's son that spells out this hope. It's a cleverly manipulated, highly political version of the parable of the vineyard.
Cranach the Younger has updated it so that the idle labourers are actually the Catholics. There's the Pope in all his magnificence, while bishops and priests light pointless bonfires. Others just loll about, while down here a whole load of them are throwing stones down the well. But look at the Lutheran side of the garden. What a picture of order. It's a fantastic piece of painted propaganda. And I think what it really shows us is the extent to which, in the aftermath of Luther's teaching, a real them and us mentality developed. Them Italians, them Catholics, and us sober Lutherans. And that actually fed in to a rising sense of German nationalism, that maybe one day the German lands would become a place called Germany. But it wouldn't quite work out that way, not for a fair few centuries, and the world these people really inhabited turned out to be a lot more fractious, divisive and dangerous than this neat little garden of opposing ideologies.
Luther's dream of a unified Protestant Germany turned out to be just that. A dream. Many states, especially in the south, stayed loyal to Rome. The old divisions simply gaped wider, thanks to this new enmity. The German lands became more fragmented than ever before, more vulnerable to invasion and attack. And that truth too is reflected in the mirror of German art. This is one of the greatest pictures ever created by a German artist. It's Albrecht Altdorfer's The Battle of Issus, a painting inspired by a famous ancient victory, Alexander the Great's defeat of the Persians.
Altdorfer painted it at a very charged moment in his own time, so I think, yes, it looks back to a historical moment. What it's really about is the anxiety of the present. We've got this astonishing, seething swarm of soldiers. It's humanity, but humanity conceived with such energy and dynamism. It almost encrusts the surface that the paint has become abstract. They resemble whirlpools. Or if you look at them another way, they might seem almost like an infestation of hostile insects invading the land. To me, it's very much an image of a Middle European sense of what it is to live in a land that's utterly vulnerable.
It establishes so many things that the German artist will do and will be capable of. The idea that it is the vocation of the German artist to depict the great cycles of history, to see into the future, to imagine what will happen.
Altdorfer's picture did indeed turn out to be prophetic. The greatest war of the 17th century, the 30 Years' War, would use the German lands as its theatre. It involved all the major continental powers in a violent conflict centred on faith. These prints from the period show how the battles unfolded for the hapless German people caught in the crossfire. Towns and villages were pillaged, and more than 1 in 3 people lost their lives. And when peace came in 1648, it resolved little. The terms were decided by the great powers of the day, France, Sweden, Spain, who were only too happy for Germany to remain disunited, forever subject to annexation and conquest. As the 17th century gave way to the 18th, and an era of uneasy peace, their lack of real power still nagged away at German rulers. Little more than mini-kings and queens in their own backyards, they indulged in images of power instead. This is Dresden, now restored to much of its former pomp. It was once one of a plethora of German cities where leaders fell in love with a style known as the Baroque, the perfectly grandiose manner for their perfectly grandiose fantasies. This palace is called the Zwinger, a teetering edifice encrusted with self-aggrandizing allegories. The palace was built at the beginning of the 18th century by the most flamboyant of those German rulers, Augustus the Strong. His obsession with the pleasures of art as a surrogate for power are best experienced in a museum called the Green Vault. Augustus founded it in 1723 to house his vast collection of treasures. Wandering through the mirrored rooms of the Green Vault is to enter an enormous Wunderkammer, a cabinet of curiosities. It's a labyrinth stocked with the weird and the wonderful, a strange parallel universe. There are miniature statues spouting precious coral, once thought to be the blood of the gods. Art for Augustus was an ivory tower, a place of escape. And there's a whole gallery of ivory towers in here, each one like an abstract chess piece, devised for some private game. There are delicately etched ostrich eggs, and a miscellany of other marvels. And at the centre of this palace of enchantments is, aptly enough, the image of an enchanted palace. The creation of Augustus's court goldsmith, the splendidly named Johann Melchior Dinglinger. But playful and exuberant as it appears, it speaks of a very German form of insecurity.
It's an imaginary doll's house vision of the court of the great Indian mogul Aurangzeb, the most powerful ruler in the whole of the Indian subcontinent, who was in fact Augustus the Strong's exact contemporary. What it shows is the festivities of his birthday, and people from all around the world are bringing tribute. You can see in the foreground figures measuring out gold and silver. Everyone is processing towards the great mogul seated on his throne. It's a fantasy of absolute rule. I think one of the most telling details is the fact that he left the figures freestanding. So Augustus the Strong could play with the whole thing like a child playing with a doll's house. Well, I think that fact projects you to the heart of the significance of the whole scene. Because at the same time as this is being made, England is dreaming of taking India, making India part of its empire. I think there's a huge amount of fantasy in this object. Augustus the Strong could play act the part of the mogul, but he was really playing with a power that he knew he could never really possess.
I'm on my way to Vienna. In the second half of the 18th century, it was the last seat of the old, crumbling Holy Roman Empire. An empire weakened by the eternal strife and division at the heart of the German lands.
It was a courtier at the imperial court in Vienna, Friedrich Karl von Moser, who summed up their predicament. He said, "We are weakened by partition, strong enough to harm ourselves, yet powerless to save ourselves. A great, yet despised nation, fortunate in theory, but in fact most pitiable."
This sense of disenchantment was shared by many creative figures. As the Enlightenment came to dominate intellectual thought across Europe, the Germans turned it into a movement called Sturm und Drang, storm and stress. The anguished poetry of Schiller, the tempestuous writings of the young Goethe, the simmering tensions of a heightened symphony. That same spirit of frustrated uncertainty is there in German art, but you have to seek it out behind the grand facades. Within Vienna's monumental Belvedere Palace, you'll find the work of an artist who'd once been favoured by the royal family and had created portraits of the Empress and her consort. But you'll find some very different work by the very same artist in the Belvedere's innermost sanctum. His name was Franz Messerschmitt, and these are his strangest creations. They were sculpted in the 1770s and 80s, after he'd been spurned by the court. They're the very embodiment of Sturm und Drang, not in words, but in bronze and stone.
Messerschmitt created more than 60 of these extraordinary, grimacing character heads, as they're known, during the later years of his life, and nobody really knows for sure why he did it. To many of his contemporaries, such as Friedrich Nicolai, who met Messerschmitt and wrote an account of their meeting, he seemed simply like a lunatic. Nicolai believed that Messerschmitt thought that he was possessed by demons and that each of these heads was his attempt to externalize the demon and by doing so to exorcise it.
But I think there's a more interesting way of seeing them. You could see the character heads as the beginning of something. The ragged origins of Freud's ideas about the subconscious.
What more vivid image could there be of the idea of the subconscious than this extraordinary assembly of heads, the notion that within each of us, beneath the still surface of the public self, there lurk all these unofficial desires and fears. But to me, above all, what the character heads represent is a kind of collective portrait of a generation of writers, artists, poets, dissidents, intellectuals and visionaries united by discontent and by the desire for change. You could see them as a portrait of an as yet unformed German nation, each face staring into the future. What an uncertain future it is.
And the second part of The Art of Germany is back here on BBC HD at the same time next week. Coming up next this evening, though, stay with us for comedy with The Trip.